Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Guns, brought to you by Patriot Patch Company, FFL Payments, Traditional Arms, and MAF Corporation. This show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and BOAs. And that came out weird. I'm your host, Matthew Larosiere, and I'm joined by who else but Ivan. And where are you joining us from?
Hello, I'm one of the guys that has the M14 in the Korean War. That was a thing that people think that happened, but it's true. Here I am in battlefield Korea.
Wait, why do people think that?
I don't know. I think it's because they like Korea was after World War II and the M14 was after World War II, and so they go Although,
right.
I mean, I guess it sort of dovetails in, right, with Korea having earned itself the title of being the Forgotten War, where it's sort of the least studied, but not necessarily because it's the least interesting.
Right.
Because it the more you read about the Korean War, the more it ends up sort of feeling like an alternate history, like where after World War II we did what MacArthur wanted and attacked the Chinese. Because it's sort of what happened there in a weird roundabout way. But yeah, people think the M14 was there and that it wasn't invented.
Yeah, very obviously wasn't.
And the war was kind of the genesis for its invention. But
yep. And it's also the reason we now have Hyundai and things.
That's true. And Daewoo.
And also a lot of slurs that people think came from Vietnam did not come from Vietnam. Let's go into the first thing. The Airman was charged in a SIG-related incident, a SIG-cident. And this is, of course, related to the whole P320 kerfuffle. Airman charged in fatal firearm incident at Wyoming Air Force Base, home of the missileer. But yeah, so basically, the fall man for Sig Sauer has been charged with obstruction of justice and involuntary manslaughter in connection with the fatal firearm discharge back in July, which killed that 21-year-old airman, which happened July 20th in Wyoming. Few details have come out, but this is what led to the at least that portion of the Air Force pulling all of the M18s and safety concerns. We don't have many details now, right? But what the Air Force is saying is, an individual has now been arrested on suspicion of making a false official statement, obstruction of justice, and involuntary manslaughter. So the involuntary manslaughter suspicion, right? This is all tea leaf reading. It's, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And some people who I was talking to are saying that this might have been, it's one of two things. It's either there was an accident, right, involving two people, or the individual, there may have been a self-harm concern and then a cover-up, basically. So I don't know. Do you have any real opinions on this?
I guess to go all the way back around, right? It seems like every time that there's some bit of 320 drama, not to say that the nothing ever happens people are right, but it seems like so often the 320 stuff that gets the most attention is not the biggest issue 320s have,
right?
Because from the very onset, the amount of details available on this one were certainly indicative of the 320 having issues, and it began the usual round of witch hunts where people went and devised all sorts of cockamamie tests.
Oh, wait, hold on. Wait, are you using devising cockamamie ways? You couldn't possibly be talking about the screwing with your gun by literally putting a screw in the trigger and then dildoing with it until you make the soy face, right?
Right.
You could
exactly.
Did you see that?
Holy crap!
Yeah.
Wow.
So this was one big result of this, and I saw a lot of people doing this, and of course we haven't done a show since this happened, and people started doing the screw test, and people were selling 320 saying this one passed the screw test, but I got to get rid of it because X, Y, or Z reason, right? This is so. Okay. Nobody likes hitting on SIG and hating them more than me. I don't know. There might be a couple people.
I might because there's a SIG gun that you like.
Maybe by the US SIG?
No.
Oh.
Like, I don't like any of them. I don't like a single one of them.
Okay. Well, maybe you do. No, there's actually 2 SIG guns that I like. Comment down in the Douglas if you can guess them. But yeah, this became the thing, right?
You can't say a not even a positive. You cannot say a fact-driven word about SIG that can be misconstrued as being vindicative of anything a SIG has ever made without being accused of being a SIG shill, right? Because as soon as there's maybe, I mean, I think it's not controversial to say that 320's got some manner of issues going on with it.
Yep. Something is wrong.
If you try and speak in a manner that is trying to stay factual and unbiased about this topic, you'll be accused of being a SIG shill because people have gotten so emotional about this, and it's not unreasonable to get emotional, right? Because a lot of people don't understand what the issue is, but they can perceive that there's an issue, and so they just want to go with whoever's voice is the loudest or the most dramatic or the most soy-faced in this particular instance, where it's something happens on a gun that makes it look like it's bad, right? Because Moist Critical, right, the guy who does like YouTube drama stuff a lot of the time, was covering this. It was big enough news that it was like, oh, SIG is cooked because you can wiggle the slide on the gun. And ultimately, all that Wyoming test shows is that sympathetic movement exists in a 320, like it exists in a Glock and like it exists in a massive number of other firearms.
Well, so you're saying sympathetic movement. Remember, that's not normal English. So I'm not insulting the intelligence of our audience or anything. It's just that is not a normal term. So, but this became the thing. You were seeing it. All of you guys were seeing it. Everybody was doing this test, and they would all have the same reaction where they were like, "Oh my God, look, it's so insane." And then you and Jared, right? Did you make a video, or was Jared the one who made the video?
I made a video first, just showing that it could be done with a Glock, because I guess we were both busy enough whenever this test broke that I watched the video in the background and I was like, wow, this guy's so fucking stupid. No one will take this serious. This is so idiotic.
Yeah, because literally it's guys, I pulled the trigger.
I pulled the trigger and my gun fired. Wow, it's my face.
Yeah,
but a bunch of people saw his video or snippets of his video where he mealy-mouthed explained what 1mm past the wall was, and a lot of people assumed that 1mm of free play on the trigger on a 320 makes it fire. That's not true.
Yep.
He was very deliberate and included a section in the video for people who actually bothered to pay attention, where he measured 1mm of pull past the wall and showed this is where the screw takes it to. 1mm past the wall on a Glock or a SIG is mere thousandths of an inch away from the gun firing normally.
Well, the gun is trying to fire at that point. So again, this was all, everyone was super confused. And I feel like, because when we were talking about it, it was before, whatever happened. At first I looked at the video, I looked at everybody reacting, I'm like, hold on. Because at first I was like, well, that's pretty fucked up if with 1mm of movement, it'll set the thing off. So I went and got my M17 and I moved the trigger 1mm, and I'm like, that's not possible to have any result. I'm like, that's not possible to whatever. And so then I looked back at the video, I'm like, oh my God. So here's the thing you have to remember. The SIG is a full cock striker, right? Kind of like the P99, kind of like a lot of guns that have good triggers. Not saying the SIG has a good trigger, but at the end of the day, the SIG striker is very stupid shaped, but you have your striker sear trying to go forward, right? So there's your striker trying to go forward, and then the sear is holding it. When you get to the wall, right? So when you're taking the first like 1/4 inch of pull on any normal handgun is not doing anything to the sear. It's not moving at all. When you get to the wall, that hard point right before the gun goes off, what you're doing is pulling down this sear, right? With respect to the SIG, with respect to a P99, you're actually kicking the chair out from under the sear, which is really interesting. So when you're doing that, like, you're translating a lot of movement. So you're taking it down here, right? And so then if you dildo with the slide, right, what do you think you're doing? You're moving one part of this assembly relative to the other. And so, yeah, it's pretty normal that that the sear would be released at that point, because again, you're pulling the trigger, which is deactivating the firing pin block. So the gun is ready to fire. You're just taking out the slop in the slide to frame fit is all you do. It proves nothing. And so then with the Glock, Glocks are partially cocked. So then when you push the Glock to the wall, what you're doing is actually putting it at the same position. You're pulling the striker all the way back and then getting it to the point where it can go down. And so you and Jared both did videos where you pulled the Glock trigger back.
Yeah, because of course with a SIG you can stick a screw above the trigger to pull it back. With a Glock, the geometry in it sort of prevents that, and of course
the Glock kind of winds up looking a little dumber, right? But
right, and so the Glock, we just use, both Jared and I just used a nut and bolt threaded to adjust 1 millimeter past the wall out of a Glock. And sure, if you wiggle the slide, that same movement exists and it will drop the striker.
My favorite thing was Jared's video, though. He goes like this, and then it goes off, and he just goes.
And so ultimately, right, there's a kernel of truth at the end of the tunnel in the Wyoming video, right, where the extent of sympathetic movement present can present a safety issue in a system like this. There are 320s. Some 320s I've handled have almost no slide to frame wobble at all. It's like rock solid. Some I've seen have like 50 thousandths left and right, and what seems like a tenth of an inch up and down. It's shocking. Like you can feel the whole slide get picked up as you pull and release the trigger to get it to the wall. You move the slide up and down like a really clapped out high power. It's bad.
Mine does that.
The extreme variation going on there cannot possibly be a good thing for this mechanical system, because that movement doesn't need to be there. Because I saw some people trying to defend the 320 going, well, all handguns have to have that movement. That's not really true.
Not that much.
Like if you had like a milled frame Glock, for example, right? A milled aluminum frame for a Glock that fit perfectly to the slide, like race 1911s, where there is no perceptible movement in the slide whatsoever relative to the frame, the Glock would still work fine, right? That movement, and same story with the 320, right? If you had a milled 320 frame, perhaps, you don't need that movement to be there. The movement's not beneficial. It's an artifact of the fact that, in order to make these things mass manufacturable, they're not going to be hand lapping and polishing rails to frames. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. The rails have to be a little bit small. Like the largest rail you make has to be smaller than the smallest frame or the smallest slide rail.
And people sort of confuse the slide to frame fit as being a, quote, tolerance stacking issue, when the tolerance stacking issue is here the sympathetic movement, right? The fit there affects the fit somewhere else, in our case at the striker sear interface. Right. And certainly that is a problem. That has to be a part of the problem of the 320's whole collage of issues. There have been other people and other YouTube channels that have been much more intellectually rigorous in trying to dig to the bottom of the issues. It seems like the disassembly safety latch can be mixed between 10 millimeter and 45 guns and 9 millimeter guns, such that whenever you then reassemble the gun, the striker will be held in a halfway pulled down position permanently until you jiggle with the slide release some. And if you don't jiggle with the slide release, that striker being in the halfway position, a certain amount of sympathetic movement could release the striker without the trigger being pulled to the wall if you had a particularly loose fitting gun. Then you need the gun to have its out of battery safety broken, but people have demonstrated the out of battery safety breaking, and then there was that FBI test, right, that showed that even with a functional out of battery safety, sometimes the striker just goes straight past it. And people take this as being particularly worrying or frightening. Sometimes Glocks will do this with particularly poorly fit together Glocks. Having messed with 3D printed Glocks to a rather extreme extent, I can tell you that you can get Glocks that will overpower their out of battery safety one way or the other. Now, this is all, of course, aftermarket parts and OEM standard run of the mill Glocks. I have not observed this happening, but the possibility for a out of not a battery, but
I think the important thing to note there is that the firing pin block is, that's a piece of tech that is kind of hard to do in a foolproof way.
Yes, it's there not as a primary safety. It's sort of there as a, if all else fails, here's your seatbelt, right? It's not going to prevent the crash. It's going to hopefully act as a seatbelt in the event things fail. And it seems like 320s are not particularly well designed, at least based off of what that FBI testing showed, is a worrying number of times it just doesn't work.
Right. And it's because of the way the shapes interact
Yes.
with each other. It tends to want to overpower it, which, again, if you had it all hard, 90-degree interrupts, then your problem would be your firing pin block being too likely to stop it when you're actually pulling the trigger, right? So it's hard to do perfectly, so this isn't a slam dunk on the 320, but I think you put it well, that the 320 just has a whole portfolio of issues.
In some combination, or all of these things being present, in addition to the fact that sear and striker surface wear is evident on a lot of these guns. And I know, I think it's LFD Research is the YouTube channel. I might have the name wrong, but they have been particularly rigorous about figuring out the issues with these guns. And going through production years on them, they have found, they're trying to nail down like the ghost revisions or the secret revisions that SIG has put in some of the parts on the guns, where across 6 or 7 years of production, you've got several different parts, and several different combinations of these parts may or may not be capable of letting the gun fire, or the sear perching issue may or may not exist. So there's certainly a lot of engineering hijinks going on here that make this issue particularly difficult to nail down. But at some rate, a combination of the sears getting damaged, and then maybe incorrect takedown bars being in the gun, and many other factors contribute to maybe eventually a gun where you could find a repeatable wanting to fire on its own going on. And certainly with the, it's not a uncommon gun, right? A lot of them have been produced. The chances that maybe a couple of these guns are out there is reasonable, right? I think there's a reasonable chance that exists. However, every time one of these instances happen, everybody rushes to the press to be like, oh, I've figured it out, right? Here's the issues. When the issue with the guns going off in their holsters is, well, if I pull the trigger and wiggle the slide, they could go off in their holsters. In fact, I think that SIG's defense of the gun that everyone makes fun of is, oh, in the holster, the trigger's getting pulled. I don't think that's probably the case in a lot of these videos we've seen.
Right.
Because there's nothing in the holster.
You're pulling it a lot, right? So that's why this was misleading, because at first I thought, like many people did, and this is one of those things where, I thought to myself, I'm like, maybe I'm stupid because I'm thinking there's no way, right? I hate this gun. I hate this company. I want this to be right. But I kind of had that gut thought where I'm like, there's no way. I don't know, but maybe I'm stupid. And then, of course, it turns out no. But, I was imagining, I guess I can see, a tight retention holster, like moving it a little bit, but not to the wall. Just no way. Not to the point where, because the thing is, your initial movement of the trigger is not pulling down the sear at all. It is not taking downward movement of the sear. It just isn't. It's only when you get to the wall that it starts to pull down. So I think that this whole, putting a screw in your gun and wiggling it is just a massive red herring, which is frustrating.
Ultimately, these sort of witch hunts, every time this thing happens, seems like it only gets us further from finding any sort of truth with a capital T about the P320. And I guess that's probably what makes it such an interesting story is 10, 20, 30 years from now, maybe it'll be figured out, maybe it won't, but people will continue to discuss it. And it will continue to sort of be that little hot topic thing, right? Because we do exist in a world where people talk about American cast AKs blowing up, and there hasn't been a spree of that happening for some time, right? And people are still afraid of cast parts and guns that were designed to have cast parts. They're worried about because there were cast guns in the 90s and early 2000s that were blowing up, right? So it's sort of that thing where it becomes sticky because nobody quite understands their gun well enough to know why something is or isn't an issue.
Right.
But they can be presented something in a really flashy way that it's like, oh, wow, that's a big problem. And because they're not interested enough to get involved to understand their gun or the gun that's at issue well enough, they'll just run with, well, that's a big problem. That's unsafe.
Right.
To the extent where there was some people who saw this video where their takeaway was, oh, the reason the 320 is firing is because people are getting screws in their holsters that get wedged in the gun and then the gun goes off. Where no, that's not close to what anybody was claiming. But
Right.
because these things are so interesting and people want to sound smart, you have to be the smartest guy in the room about the P320. Their takeaway is then wildly wrong, and that gets us further and further away from finding the truth about this stuff.
Yep. And you know, it was really frustrating because I got excited because right around the same time this happened, SIG accidentally dropped 3D models the same way that Ruger did.
Yes.
And I got super excited because I'm like, okay, these are probably based on their internal assemblies. So we got to look at them, and the whole lower is there, but we already had models of the
Right.
the fire control unit, and the slide was empty in the models. There was no fire controls in the slide.
Right, the whole
And so,
striker assembly unit.
yeah, striker assembly was just not there. And plus the firing pin block and everything, all that stuff was just not there. And so I was just like, because I feel like if we get to really sit there and stare at it, in a 3D assembly, I feel like we could get to the bottom of it.
My personal gut instinct is that I hate to say that the people who just keep saying tolerance stacking is tolerance stacking, quality control tolerance stacking. I hate to say that the people that keep parroting
those people, by the way, whenever you hear somebody say that tolerance stacking, they do not understand what that word.
Like they'll very frequently just be talking about the tolerances between two parts, and that's
right.
Not tolerance stacking.
There's just tolerance.
Stacking means something, but I hate to say that there's a good possibility that they're correct, but I mean, first off, here's the first caveat. I doubt that SIG has one set of master models for this gun because they have redesigned parts in this gun countless times, not just switching materials for parts, but manufacturing processes for parts. And whenever you're switching parts over to MIM, the way the part's designed is going to be pretty substantially different.
Yeah.
And so because they've driven so many changes, I doubt there's a master CAD that's like, this is the way the gun is supposed to be, which is probably right. From an engineering discipline perspective, that's how assemblies fail and work in
that's how this happens.
That's how this happens. But ultimately, I bet you looking at the CAD assembly, or the way the gun is intended to go together, I bet there isn't a problem there. It's not until you get to their drawings where they've got, assuming that they don't have full model-based definition, where they've got tolerances called out on 3D models. I imagine they're probably still doing 2D drawings, at least for some stuff, if I had to guess. I bet it's not until you have those in front of you that you can see interferences, or probably in this case, right, for these particular issues, lack of interferences in parts, where if you do a tolerance stack-up analysis, you'll be able to see that, for example, with if the hole in the striker body is misplaced by such and such an amount, and then if the striker block is undersized by its maximum allowable extent, and then you have the maximum amount of wiggle between the frame, but then the maximum amount of stick up between the sear and the tab that disengages the striker block, that there's some scenario, right, where you could have those parts fit together where the gun has about half as much sear
and with the sear being worn.
Right. And so the gun's got half as much sear engagement as it's supposed to nominally, and then when it gets worn, and then maybe if you've got the wrong striker bar in the gun, and then maybe if you have the thing set up just right so that the striker block can only ever engage about 50%, the striker,
and there's a screw in your holster.
And then you've got the screw in your holster, and you stand on your head just right. And for then whatever reason, it's always that this happens to cops, so you probably have to have a shiny badge on your shirt, and then it'll go off. So
here's the other thing is what I spent quite a bit of time because we came up with one of the first 320s that could go into California. Well, we didn't come up with it. We were helping those guys. And so I took apart a lot of 320s, and one thing I remember was that, and these were very early guns, when you'd put it together, like you'd field strip it and then put it back together, if you didn't hold your mouth right, the slide catch just wouldn't work. It was something stupid like that. And the trigger wouldn't reset.
So that ends up being the gist of the problem with the what versus 10 versus 9 connector bars. And it's a safety that SIG added to the gun to make it so that if the disassembly lever isn't in the assembled position, the trigger is disconnected. And in order to reconnect it, you have to have the slide back and then lift up all the way as hard as you can on the slide catch. And then engaging the slide catch re-engages this bar, which is like, oh my God. And then failing to do that will sometimes leave the gun in a state where you cannot pull the trigger. Now, also, you're not supposed to be able to insert a magazine, but the problem becomes when you've got the 10 or 45 bar in your gun. In a 9mm gun, you can insert a magazine. So now you can have a mag in the gun, load the gun is now loaded, but the trigger bar isn't quite reconnected, which means that the sear is sitting up about half as high as it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's then at this point that I think it's the LFD research guys. I hope that's their YouTube channel name anyway. They so set up a gun and then were able to wiggle it and make it discharge a live round without pulling the trigger, just shaking the gun. And
I can say that those ones that when they were in that situation, I didn't know that pushing it up would like fix that, because that's not a like.
And pushing it, you have to push it up hard enough it feels like it's going to break it, because the entire gun feels like it's made poorly.
Right, but I can tell you that, and I didn't have 10 or 45 or 40 parts. I only had 9mm parts. There were some that I could put the mag in, because what I would do is I would like how I would either take it apart and put it back together, and that would work every single time, or I'd put a mag in and then pull it back, and it would like drop it and dry fire it, and I got a different trigger pull 3 times until it was good. So I feel like there was just a lot of there is a lot of free space in the fire control components. Like, I mean, look at the way that the torsion spring sits in the bottom of it, just kind of flopping out in the open. There's a lot of parts that can just also kind of do this, and whenever you put it together, they do tend to find their space. But like when you're a cop, how often does your gun get put together, taken apart, put back together, and then the first thing you do is just put the mag in and put it on your holster? Probably a lot. And so I think that might have something to do with it as well, because if you just look inside a 320 fire control unit, you can see a lot of parts just kind of chilling, and they're depending on their relationship with another part to keep them in the right spot.
Right. And another test that I would like to see further expanded on is that on the 320, where the sear sits in the back of the fire control unit, especially when it's in a frame, it's sort of got an isolated pocket that it's in. People were misunderstanding the whole question of lint and unburnt powder and debris buildup. Mm-hmm. You can have a buildup there at the sear that the striker's constantly trying to push that stuff into the sear surface itself. Right. If you had a substantial buildup in that rear pocket, there's nowhere for that to go unless you take the fire control unit out of the gun and then clean it. Meanwhile, on something like the 365, they added a space for that stuff to go away. They also substantially redesigned a lot of the stuff that people will look at the 320 and go, is that right? The 365 was substantially improved in a lot of these ways, which is a real head scratcher. But there's certainly some amount of testing that I would like to see done further, as far as somebody just taking dirt and grime from another gun, right? So take your jar of dirt and grime from guns and see if you can apply a certain amount to the 320 that will eventually stop having the sear come up as far. If somebody can prove that you can consistently reduce sear engagement as a result of debris getting in that pocket, I think you've yet again gotten closer. Additional evidence of, right? Because ultimately, right, the necessary conditions for a 320 to have to go off is the striker block has to fail, but the FBI testing showed that it just does that. Like they may just fail whenever they're working correctly, right?
Yeah.
So at some rate, you have to get the sear to drop down, and because of the way the 320 is designed, the sear can drop without a trigger pull.
Right.
The only thing that holds the sear where it is just its spring,
which is an artifact of this gun being a hammer gun.
Right. And so ultimately, the testing that needs to take place, the discoveries that need to be made, is as many ways that people can find that limit sear engagement or reduce sear engagement is possible. If this is for an object infiltration in that rear pocket, that's great. If it's the disassembly safety bars being swapped out, well, that one's pretty close to provable at this point. If it's damage or wear on the sear surfaces, great. Those are the sort of things that need to be demonstrated further. The sort of things that don't necessarily need to be demonstrated further is like sympathetic movement tests where we pull the trigger most of the way and then wiggle the gun. Sure, sympathetic movement does play into, right? That does
Right. No,
effectively
pulling the
reduce
trigger past the wall. Anything that pulls the trigger past the point
Right.
it's dropping the sear is just
anything that pulls the trigger at all probably is a non-starter, because in these holsters, I don't think that's happening.
I feel like it's fair game if it's take up. You know,
Maybe
anything less than a pound, I feel like is fair game.
perhaps.
Yeah. But
to assume that maybe there's some amount of inertia or something going on, right?
I would just say
worst-case scenario.
the design, like that movement should not do anything, so I'm fine with
Right.
it being included, you know.
But ultimately, it's not to say that everything that happened in the Wyoming test is completely useless. It is a data point, but for it to be a test, it would have had to have been compared to something else. For this test to mean anything, right? It would need to be
Right.
compared to something else. A Glock 1mm past the wall with a similar amount of wiggle in the slide will also release the striker in a way that will discharge a round. So there wasn't anything particularly proven there. And I know a lot of people's then gut reaction, right? Their knee-jerk reaction was, well, a Glock's got a trigger safety, and that's the big difference. Is a Glock is a part-cocked striker, and it's got a trigger safety, and so you have to defeat that. But that's not what Wyoming's test was about, because he, in fact, multiple times in his video said that everything presupposes that the trigger is being pulled, and in most of his examples he gave, the trigger was being pulled by a finger. And the Glock's trigger safety is, in fact, designed to be defeated by a finger. Sure, right? I wouldn't mind seeing somebody do a bunch of tests, get the 6 most popular handguns or whatever, and just start sticking foreign objects on the trigger groups and seeing what will or won't defeat their various trigger pull safety mechanisms, right? There would be a test that tells you something. But pointing out that the 320 doesn't have one, apropos of nothing and in comparison to nothing, tells you nothing.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. But you know what we see a lot of as well is the rest of the industry just decided to vulturize, which I enjoyed the shit out of this. Look at this. Smith & Wesson wasted no time in M&P we trust. Carry what you can trust. And I love the IQ. Would you be willing to do a P320 trade-in/upgrade program? Why? Kel-Tec. Carry with confidence.
When Kel-Tec's bagging on you, it's over.
Since 2008, the Rutgers Lissip has earned its place as a trusted favorite. Then Beretta, history, reliability. 30 plus years of trust.
Beretta is still upset about the M9A4 losing.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder why they picked that image. Lightweight, reliable, safe. This is so funny. But it's very clear what is being said in those ads. Ours is safe. But if you wiggle them with the screw.
I think each of those guns, I think that you could make them fail the quote unquote screw test.
If you screw with them. Yeah. But anyway, that's all a lot to say there. Real quick now, I just want to talk about, I don't know if we talked about it last time, but there was the 2 NFA lawsuits that were brought by, one was every gun group on Earth through Cooper Kirk, the old favorite. And then the other one was the GOA suit with GOA and a couple of their friends. And these were brought in response to the big, beautiful bill, and they were styled as tax and spend clause challenges. I actually went on with Stephen Gutowski at the Reload, and we kind of did a deep analysis on them. And there's some problems.
The spoiler alert, right? The too long didn't watch, even though I do recommend you watch, is that there's serious problems with bringing these as tax challenges.
Because there's serious problems the way they were brought.
Right.
Yeah. I think, to be clear, I think that the Second Amendment claim looks solidest on the big group suit, the non-GOA one. The first draft of the GOA one was, I don't want to be, it was garbage.
I believe it was one of their lawyers. If it wasn't one of their lawyers, it was one of their plaintiffs.
It was one of their lawyers, and he admitted that he did it.
Hours.
Yeah, he admitted that he did it in 24 hours. And it made no sense. It was seeming to articulate a decent Second Amendment challenge that it never mentions. and then just asserts that Congress has exceeded its power without, identifying any sort of standing aside from the fact that people didn't want to be subject to like kind of day one shit. And so I thought it was really embarrassing. Of course, most people don't read them, but it was really horrible. And
it didn't strike me as particularly well written. And then the timing on it to jam it out in 24 hours and get it filed then the same day the bill was signed, July 4th by Trump.
Right.
And then the fundraising nonsense that went on, fundraising blast that went on in the wake of it, seems to me like there was an attempt to be, we're going to be the first gun group to come and sue over this. As soon as the bill's enacted, we're suing on it. And I don't think they were particularly concerned. I imagine the attitude was one of, it's okay, we can amend it. We can amend our complaint.
We can waste our one free amendment on this. And so they did amend it. In fact, it seems they copied a lot of stuff from the better one, which, hey, there's no such thing as plagiarism and there kind of is, but whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's all fair game. It's all public filings. But I thought that was really dirty and low down, and just generally not serious, because the way both of them were claiming that these were historic, first ever tax and spend clause challenges to the NFAs, we're making history here, would be totally true if those challenges hadn't been brought since literally the moment the NFA was enacted.
Yeah, the NFA was like, the NFA was barely old enough to feed itself at the time that the first challenge that was.
So it was not old enough.
Came out.
It was like fully played out. And then we had every 10 years consistently another tax and spend clause challenge on the same exact theory. And like it's just problematic, right? This type of rush job shit, it's just not going to help us, because like you're dealing with, especially when you venture into tax law. And I know there's some people, in our space that like to remind me that I have a tax LLM and that I'm a tax lawyer, and that that's some like derogatory thing. Tax law is pretty complicated. And I think Article 3 in the Constitution was a mistake, but it was really written to make it very hard to challenge general taxpayer type issues. It's like taxpayer standing does not exist, period. As an independent component. So you have to have like redressability, injury. It's hard to hit all those branches, and the courts have made them harder. And it's not clear that the people who drafted these really looked up the cases that came before. And like, I almost wonder if the reason they thought that these were so groundbreaking is new is because they didn't actually do their research.
I didn't want to say it, but that's entirely possible. I guess the one bit of research that it seems took place is that the Cooper Kirk NRA lawsuit.
Yeah, they cited the 1937 case.
Right, and they also are like extremely weasel wordy when talking about suppressors, like because they're trying to make it so that the common can kicking issue of saying that, well, suppressor is not an arm won't be an issue here by talking about suppressed firearms. You're talking about the suppressor in conjunction with the gun that it's meant to go on to try and preempt that at some rate. So, okay, I wish them luck with that. But otherwise, both cases, both challenges, tax and spend aspect is not particularly convincing, because the same arguments have been brought before. And the fact that the tax is now $0 instead of $200 doesn't really change that analysis.
Yeah, the problem is that they didn't eliminate the tax. They made it a $0 tax. The other problem is that both the suits ignore the fact that, like, they don't touch the fact that the remainder of the tax statute is still fully in play, specifically on manufacturers and importers.
Yeah. And that's the thing that every time you're going to stub your toe on is, so to make that more clear for people who aren't dorks about this.
Yeah.
if you're a FFL, right, a firearms manufacturer that's licensed, in order to make NFA firearms, you have to pay a special occupational tax. It's that SOT, right?
Right.
It's a yearly thing that you pay, and whenever you pay that, you don't have to do per item registration fees. You just pay the one-time tax a year, and then you tell the ATF every time you've made an NFA firearm through a Form 2. The problem is that SOT fee schedule is still a thing, right? That didn't change,
Right.
and that comes from the NFA. So that's all still plugged in the same places. So there is still a tax being collected through the special occupational taxpayer scheme,
right,
for people to make and then be able to transfer out of their manufacturing FFL these items.
Yeah, and the theory behind it, and it's real BS, right? Because they stylized it as a tax to try to get around a Second Amendment concern that they believed was a concern in 1934, but now all of a sudden we don't think NFA firearms are subject to Second Amendment protection, and that's why we're doing all this weaselly. But hey, that's why all of this grew the way it did. But the problem is that if you're going to bring a tax and spend challenge, you have to challenge. You can't challenge the effects. You can't challenge like one outgrowth. You have to assault the structure of the tax, and they didn't do that.
And there's still a tax being collected associated with these items, which is a pretty, especially because at the end of the day, at least for suppressors, with the suppressor sales hitting new peaks or whatever,
right?
Most of those are manufactured by manufacturers and not by individuals making them themselves.
And then they're manufactured by large manufacturers who are then sent to a distributing dealer who is also a taxpayer.
Yep, who is also subject to the special occupational tax.
Right.
In order to get them across state lines, that's required.
So here's and again, this, don't get me wrong, I think that both of the groups are right. I think that both of the lawsuits are right in terms of the spirit of the Constitution and what should be. Okay. Like, I think that they should win. That said, I also know how these cases are supposed to be structured, right? And so the problem is that, and that doesn't mean they might not still win. Like, if you have a very sympathetic judge, just like they break their backs to side against us all the time, they might break their back to side with you. But whether that's going to hold up in an appeals court, who knows? So if I'm the government, right, and I've seen this thing, what I'm going to say is, and again, this is devil's advocate, all we've done is change the rate for the non-business individuals, because the real purpose of this is to make sure that all of the business entities are paying their yearly tax. And the only way we can make sure of that is if we can track that the guns have gone, through the, from the manufacturer to the right distributor, and then only then does it go out to individuals. But if it wasn't going out to individuals, still through the transfer record, which is the only way we have to know that a firearm was made subject to the taxing authority, it would be too easy to launder these out of the system, and then they could come back into a dealer who wouldn't, because then why would he pay his SOT if he wasn't filing a form, doing a form when it came back in? This is supposed to be for taxpayers, right? And so in the tax and spend clause analysis, that would be a convincing argument. That's the issue,
right? I saw a lot of people saying that, well, the registration can't possibly be a tax if it's $0, but that's the problem is that's not really true,
right?
And then then there's the particularly sticky thing of, I've seen a lot of people saying that if it's the fee or if it's the registration, them putting a tax on a right can't possibly be permissible, and that's a violation, that's an overreach of their tax and spend powers. The problem is you're going to have a hard time finding a court that will say that, because the way that courts, in other cases have tried to resolve this is by saying that the underlying right protects the activity, and it's not it's not an abuse of their tax and spend power. They won't.
You have to bring a Second Amendment challenge, fundamental rights.
And so they would say it's a Second Amendment challenge, and
which now both of them have, right? And I think that's a much stronger argument.
That's certainly good, especially post Bruin.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that even post Bruin, there have not been a lot of sympathetic cases or judges or courts that have looked at the question of NFA items and then settled it properly.
Right.
With even courts in both circuits that we're looking at saying, well, suppressors aren't arms; they can't be arms because they're just something that you use with a gun, which would leave you down the road of magazines, optics, replacement parts for the gun. Apparently those wouldn't be protected either, which is just deeply and fundamentally unserious. Or they'll look at things like SBRs or short-barreled shotguns and come to the conclusion that, well, it's dangerous or unusual, or dangerous and unusual, and we're interested in being unserious and pretending that these, because the justification against short-barreled shotguns way back when in the Miller case was, well, no military application, no militia application exists for this. Meanwhile, today, I don't think our military uses a shotgun that doesn't have a short barrel, which is just whatever. But everything's so cool and good because of this.
But you know what? That court was switched on because shotguns were not made. That court just knew it. They're like, shotguns aren't for killing people, stupid. They're for birds. But let all of the home defense shotgun havers now
get upset.
Get upset at the single least efficient way to shoot rifle targets at pistol distances that they have. But anyway, next up, guys, it is Traditional Arms LLC, Zero Compromise Holsters and Gears, made in Florida. This is the holster that we carry. You got quick ship options, you got custom made options, you can get your stay put sauce. All of this crap you can get, just look at it. It's available on there for sale on the website. Well, who agrees discreet carry, blah, 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 make the best clip, blah, blah, blah. Our title fight holsters, OG design, don't get it wrong with the new merch, the hit in the range this weekend, our SIP holster. It's traditionalarms.com, and if you want a discount, use promotional code FUDBusters or Ratman. You can get it yourself a good deal on a good holster.
I put a 1911 in one of the holsters, and then I carried it.
Oh my God. You're not supposed to do
that. I like carrying 1911s in a very obtuse sort of way. Of course, I don't go outside into public a lot because I don't like doing that. So, a lot of the time that I carry, it's just around the house or property or whatever. And because of that, the sort of threat vector that I have is non-existent, and I'm just screwing around. But do still carry it quite a bit, and so that's probably the reason I get away with carrying 1911s as much as I do. Is
it's not actually a weapon.
I don't have a job where I'm like there was a couple interesting threads I read of guys who did roofing work, right? Roof as workers, and were carrying guns. And I just sat there the whole time thinking, I feel like I'd constantly be sitting on my gun or rolling on my gun or touching my gun into things. And in that case, it would also be too heavy to have a 1911.
Yeah.
But that was an interesting thing, is that, there's people that have jobs where they actually have to work and then they have to carry their guns. And that's interesting.
Yeah. I still carry a PDPF and I like it.
Yeah.
And you know what? Just again, to talk about the 320 thing, that whole kerfuffle actually made me feel slightly weird about carrying a full cock striker.
Right.
And then we talked about the way the Walther striker group is designed, and it's just no, this is hilariously safe.
Right. It needs a trigger pull for the sears to be capable of disengaging, or for parts in the gun to break, several parts to break.
Yeah.
Which would then also prevent the trigger from wanting to work in the first place. And then the Walthers have the Glock style striker safety, which as we explained, right, sometimes can fail. It shouldn't be relied on as a accident prevention. It should be relied on as a safety belt. However, there aren't articles and stories of people's Glocks shooting them, and the FBI hasn't investigated them because they don't do that.
Speaking of things that should be investigated, you remember a while ago there was a really big win.
There
was a huge win, epic win for gun owners, gun rights, because NAGR got a settlement to end their FRT lawsuit so that there would be no clarity, and then all that they got to do is Rare Breed has to vigorously defend one of their patents, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, so this was, of course, a huge win for the gun rights community. And, there was the Gun Owners of America Goals Convention, which I got to check out one of these years. But a lot of people were there having a nice time. And the rare breed people were there, engaged in the completely human behavior of handing out cease and desist letters to other people at the gun rights convention.
This is a big win.
It's a big win. It's like how everybody was like making fun of that big guy in the middle, and that Lawrence is actually the goblin-esque individual on the right.
His last name starts with Demon, and I like that people were pointing that out. Just
his last name starts with Demon, and also look at him, like look at how far his hands go. It's like it's very impish build.
He's spec'd into imp spec.
Yeah, this is Micah Mayfield posted this. He said, Lawrence DeMonico from Rare Breed Firearms used his time at Goals, an event for 2A advocacy, to issue C&Ds to fellow 2A companies for infringing on his patents. I couldn't think of a more disgusting display of human behavior. I will personally be boycotting Rare Breed from this point on. And this was AS Design FRTs. The one and only Rare Breed stopped by the booth at Goals to give us a, quote, gift. Nice to meet you guys. See you soon.
I like their attitude about it. That's funny.
Yeah, because also they're the whole thing with Rare Breed. We did a video recently, kind of talking about that. It was on one of the recent twigs where we just kind of went through bit by bit of just how really fragile their patent is. And I think the problem is that these might not be the smartest people.
Yes,
I think it's possible that this demon gentleman and his friends who also look that way. I don't know if that middle guy is an innocent bystander, but the one on the left very much looks related. He's got that aura, doesn't he? Not the rear left. I think the guy here on the left was from AS Designs or whatever. But this is the common situation where you got a cat who has no connection to the gun community, really, who purchases a design from a entirely different insane person.
A uniquely insane person.
Yeah, which was, what was his name?
Thomas Allen Graves.
Graves, right? Yes, who didn't invent the FRT, because we found that was invented in the Depression, but he did really come up with what this thing is.
Right.
Lawrence buys it. Graves gets very confused because he is a unique breed of insane person, and winds up basically is now fully owned by Mr. DeMonico, which was horrible. And yeah, so now the thing to do is not sell a product.
Yep.
And just be as vile as conceivably possible.
Yeah. That was what that big win was actually about, is making sure that you don't actually sell these things, you just sue people.
Yeah. And so thank you, NAGR.
This is a big historic win.
Thank you because they've made sure to tell us repeatedly that everything about this is a big, huge win.
That there's nothing underhanded or bad. There's nothing bad that could possibly come from this for anyone.
Did you know that NAGR has the second most consistent funding to the NRA?
Did you know that we're just salty because we hate patents? The only way that you couldn't love what's going on here is if you hate patents. If you have any objection whatsoever to one individual who's not going to manufacture these things, try and consolidate all the patent rights for things that are even remotely similar to them, and then enforce them in an overly aggressive way that can't possibly actually hold up in the court of law. If you don't like someone doing that, also they're not manufacturing this and not making it available to the Second Amendment community. They're actually just buying up these patents to not produce them, which is a very strange way, something that you'd sort of expect an anti-gun group to do either. Anyway, that's just speculation, but you just don't like patents.
That's true. Am I supposed to like them?
I don't know.
I'm not saying I do or don't.
The intent behind them was maybe once respectful, but then once everything was invented, everything just got very, very, very stupid in a hurry.
Right. Well, and like this thing, right? Is so half of patent fights are scaring people, like it's bullying, right? Because this is a patent that is just not applicable to half of the stuff that they wielded against. Especially also these normal human beings, right? It got into a screaming match with Hoffman, of Hoffman Tactical. And, okay, this is really good. Like apparently they got in a screaming match on the floor of the Goals Convention, which I wish I was there. I would have loved to see that. Right? Just seeing Tim just like scream with his little hat, just like with righteous indignation. I think that would be good. But so one of the boys in the Discord, which you can join if you join the Patreons, right before the show did a search, just literally searched Twitter for Rare Breed, and I'd like to read some of the results. This is just literally, he just searched Rare Breed from Jonathan Big Wrench. Fuck Rare Breed and their $500 trigger. Tom Hoffman is a legend for the free man. Jack Christmas Forever. Rare Breed is a bunch of cigarettes. Boy, buy super safeties or Kabuto instead, both of which don't need to be completely milled. You can make them. Okay, that's very intelligent. MD half crazy because Rare Breed trigger is beat with a 30-cent three-dimensional printed bottle opener.
It's high energy. It's a high output.
That's real. Autistic Arab, that's one of our homies. James Reeves, while being a good man in many ways, takes too much of what companies say at face value. Rare Breed didn't invent the force reset trigger, man, in the 1930s, patented one for handguns. Pretty hard for Rare Breed to have any original IP, seeing as how they didn't invent the force reset trigger. So yeah, that's the word on the street about Rare Breed, which is heartening.
There's certainly a lot of vitriol that, in my honest opinion, to be quite honest, respectfully, they deserve.
You get what you deserve. But I don't get it. I do not get it. They aren't selling at all, right?
Last I had checked, no, they were not like making their triggers again, and they were like selling back inventory of WOTs or something. It's not impossible that maybe they're like trying to figure out some sort of a dealer network to avoid the constant out of stockness that they had before. But I think that if I was me, and I now had what seems like some amount of a legal monopoly, and I'm not talking a legal monopoly in terms of intellectual property rights. I'm talking about the U.S. Department of Justice has said, you're the one guy we're not going to fucking flatten for selling these things.
Yeah, we're not going to jail you.
I imagine if I was in that position, you know that the Department of Justice's opinion changes on a whim, right? Just because of a stiff breeze changes their opinion.
Yeah, I would have to, like, because these are like mostly EDM. There would be every EDM in my county would be screaming.
I would be trying to make hay while the sun shines. I would get my importer's license, and I would be importing these things left and right. I would be making these things in any country that knows how to hold respectable tolerances, because ultimately these things here. Right, and these things ultimately aren't that complicated, and you could be having them made in any country that's halfway decent at making guns, right? The WOTs were not made in the United States, and Rare Breed had no problem selling those, right? They have no moral objection to selling stuff that's imported, quote-unquote, junk. I mean, it was made out of zinc, cast metal, Zamac, but they have no problem doing this before. Why aren't they, like, importing these in massive quantities now? Because you have yourself a rather unique opportunity to make hay. Although it seems that instead their priorities are in trying to big man people for like their aura clip farming, only like in the Johnny Somali way, where everybody comes away hating you.
So here's I checked their website. Here's the best part. The settlement, which is completely unenforceable, totally dog shit, like literally not worth. It has devalued the paper it was printed on. Related only to the original patent, the non-selectable one, where it was basically like, you can make things to this patent, you have to enforce this patent.
Where the hammer directly resets the trigger.
Yes.
And it has a lock.
That's not the one that they have on their website.
Yes.
The one they have on their website is the selectable one, which is not to that same patent, right? They have now a new patent that has wild problems of enforceability. That's the only thing that's listed on their website, and it's out of stock at $450. By the way, guys, just so you know, I have a lot of experience in manufacturing gun parts. I know what components here are 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. If you make 1,000 and you are overpaying, right?
And you're
like
making them here and overpaying.
You are making them here and overpaying. If you get 1,000 of these and you paid $100 a unit, you are disabled. Like something like critical brain damage. Actually, like difficulty breathing, like bedridden type of human. So
I'm going to be entirely honest with you. If they were walking away with a 4.5 times profit margin, but they were actually making the things and making them available as fast and as hard as they could, instead of whatever the fuck it is that they are doing, I would respect them. I'd say, you know what? Go and get your bag, player.
Yeah.
But whatever this is, it's fucking terrible.
Yeah, it's like what we're going to sell 3 at a time, like maximum of 2 per transaction. Why?
Because apparently manufacturing stuff is hard, and then walking around trying to bully idiots on the internet is fun.
Yeah, we have we're got a little over 3 years left of this administration that's going to be nice to us. You know what we should do? Piss as much time as possible not making the product. I hate everyone. Why is everyone in this industry such I had a talk with somebody else in the industry that I help him with some stuff, and there's another outfit, a different one that behaves similar ways about patents, and I hate them because they their problem is they try to they go and scruple them all up to try to manufacture monopolies where they can't exist. And just I was talking to my friend, and he's like, I'm like, this industry is really, and he just stopped. He goes, they're all fucking criminals. I'm like, that's kind of what it is. It's not just the gun industry though. I've worked in the automotive industry. It's the exact same way. It's just whenever you get into a specialized field, you just find that people who niche themselves are just a different breed, I guess. It's not a very rare breed.
Yeah.
They're just assholes. And the world's full of them. And it sucks. But what are you going to do? You remember that?
Just perhaps stay tuned for what's to be done. But it would be very funny, let's say, if people did something, so theoretical people, right, in a video game, were the antagonists, and they'd been being really mean guys. It would be comedic if they were to get a comeuppance.
Yeah, something funny happened. But who knows if something funny happens? But anyway, you know what's really funny? Finally, justice for the frog hunters of Louisiana. They can finally carry firearms.
Thank goodness. I was tired of them not doing that.
Yeah, the thing I totally knew that was a thing. Yeah, so showing that at least some gun-related bills can easily pass through the state legislature in the sportsman's paradise. Frog hunters in Louisiana can now legally have peace of mind, which was a big problem because when a frog jumps at you. Senate Bill 106 allows frog harvesters to carry firearms at night. Took effect on August 1st.
What was going on in 1992 that they had solved all legislative issues down to the point where it's now finally we can get to those darn nighttime frogger gun guys.
Yeah. A lot of times you may be in a situation where you break down at night or whatever, or coming back to a bow landing. You're going to wish you had a gun with you if somebody wants to rob you or do something lying in wait for you, said Lambert.
What a perfect state.
Banner image, a nice slimy bullfrog. They are a tasty but voracious predator that can deplete stocks of small mammals, fish, and amphibian larvae. Okay. I ain't eating that one. But that's wild. You know what else is wild? Too late. Math Corp is wild, guys. MAF-arms.com. Go and get all of the products that are available. There's new products in the Glock compatible zone. There's slides, there's sights, there's upper parts kits, lower parts kits, locking blocks, and cocking cocks, and they're all available at a very low price. So guys, check out MAF-arms.com and use promotional code FUDBusters or Ratman, whichever one you want. It'll show favoritism. And make a purchase. Check it out. There's a lot of good stuff. Like, I'm serious. Go look at it right now. You haven't checked it out recently. Okay. This next one's interesting. So, you know, the summer is really hard for the gun industry. I've never really understand why, being somebody whose, you know, only entertainment budget is firearms.
I wonder if it has to do with the fact that there's not like a million contrived gift giving holidays during the summer.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just, I think the whole economy always shrinks. Like there's the stock, the old stock saying, "Sell in May and go away." But the gun industry gets it the hardest, right? It's really awful, and you know, you've seen it like every year. We see a couple companies go down, unless a Democrat is in office. But this month, and we got another article from our good friend Gutowski. Gun sales dropped below 1 million per month for the first time in 6 years.
And that's impressive because that's pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's impressive. Yeah, gun sales related background checks slid more than 8% year over year in July, landing below 1 million for the first time in half a decade, according to NSSF data. Yeah, look at that. I mean, of course, we're still nowhere near like what it was before the assault weapon ban was lifted. And it is interesting when you take a look at this graph, you see 2004, there's a blip, and then it just keeps on chugging, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But, and then, of course, until COVID, which is like wild.
Something happened.
Yeah, compound annual growth rate is minus 8.1% for 1 year and minus 2.3 for 10, up 2.6 for 15. So those are interesting. Yeah, it shows continues a losing streak for the industry. I wonder, now hear me out, could it be that everyone got their cheap AR-15? Like, that's something I think about a lot when it comes to the econometrics, right, in the gun industry, is so much of this, especially in COVID era, was the $500 AR-15. They're still a durable product, right? The AR-15, like, it doesn't break. It will be around for a decade at least, right?
I mean, it at least, because sure, PSA dog quality, blah blah
right.
blah. Most people will be an outlier if they put 1,000 rounds through the gun, and most PSAs are making it 1,000 rounds.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And so these are durable products that are going to stay around. So what happens when you, I feel like there has to be a cap for the cheap AR.
Is saturation possible? Because you don't think about it being a likely thing, but the Browning Auto 5 is probably the best case study for this. And I'm not just saying that because I like long recoil shotguns, but
I like long recoil shotguns.
Browning's own internal reporting and shareholders meetings indicated that the big problem they were running up against is Auto 5s last forever. They're 100-year-old guns in workable condition. Put new springs in them, it's great. So a new manufactured gun is going to be competing on the market with a gun that's 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old, 80 years old, 100 years old, right? You're going to be competing with stuff that you made when your great-great-grandfather was interested in buying a gun. And this is a massive problem for you because those are going to be cheaper than your new manufactured ones.
Right.
Not to mention the increased cost of rising cost of labor, right? All of that being what it is. You're competing with a market that is increasingly wanting cheaper shotguns. Your shotguns are continuing to get more expensive, and you're competing against the 6 million, 7 million of these things that you've already produced. These things in similar clones and copies. There's millions of them already out there. The market was saturated. Nobody wanted to buy a new one anymore. And so it became uneconomical to keep them in production. I wonder if there's a point where cheap ARs will get like that.
I wonder if we haven't already gotten there because, I've worked very closely with people in that segment and they're just not selling. What is selling is handguns, right? That's the big one. That'll always be the big one.
There's a screaming, shocking number of awful Turkish gas-operated shotguns that don't work. Shocking numbers get imported every year.
Right. Yeah, they do. And because of the price, right? Because you can sell them for $200.
Yep.
Right. And so that's one thing. But here's the funny thing is, I don't know if there's a bottom to that market because they come broken. Right.
Whereas don't last.
The $300-400 AR, right? We're seeing brand new ARs that are being sold.
Yeah, $350.
$350, and that's rough.
I mean, especially if you factor in inflation, that's the cheapest they've ever been.
Yep, and it's not for no reason. And I think they overproduce, and I think that because go to any pawn shop or any even gun store that sells secondhand guns, they're lousy with cheap AR-15s. I feel like that didn't happen for no reason. It didn't happen for no reason. It wasn't overnight that all of a sudden there's all these AR, right?
There's probably also a complicating market factor with those cheap ARs where they're already so cheap. A secondhand market for them isn't going to be terribly sustainable. Because what's it worth used? Half of what it was new? I don't even know if it's worth going to try and sell the thing. If it's we'll give you you go into a pawn shop, they'll give you $75 for it. I don't know if it's driving there at that point. Because the pawn shop's going to try and sell it for what, $200? They can't ask over $3 because you just buy a new one.
No, they're going to be asking for $4, and it's going to sit there on the wall.
Right.
That's what it is. And so I think that we've got a supply glut. The thing that scares me is I don't know how you walk out of that. Right.
Right. It's difficult, right? Especially because a solid amount of the U.S. gun industry has min-maxed themselves into just making one product.
Yeah.
For good reason, right? There was a lot of hay made while that sun was shiny and warm and hot. But potentially, right, a complicating factor to why Anderson went under. They OEM'd for a lot of cheap AR manufacturers, not just their own stuff, but a lot of other people's stuff. If everybody else slows down, their business has min-maxed into making the cheapest gun. By the time that everybody has a cheapest gun, or everybody that wants one can get one used or whatever, right? They're just growing out of the walls of every place that sells a gun. What difference does it make to them?
Dude, the AR market is so bad. I know somebody who's, their big producer. They are selling them for less than what it costs to make, just so that they can get the cash back from buying the parts. It's really hard to come back from that. And then that pushes everyone else down. And the next thing is is going to be the compact pistols. The Turks are doing Glock 19 Gen 3 clones. And you know what the cost is? Well, do you know what the cost is to import one?
Really cheap, like $120.
It's $90.
Yeah.
Well, of course, then you're paying the excise tax and stuff for like you get it landed. If you get if you do your bulk order, or $20. It goes then one. It's pulling the floor out. And they're producing the hell out of them.
And sure, it's going to be lower quality, right? And we all know this.
Oh, no, they're like, whoa. I like cheap guns. I like cheap garbage. But I look at the fire controls in these, I'm like, how did you do that?
But the thing that people will end up running up against is that a substantial amount of the gun buying public does not check the prices of guns online. They don't check the price of ammo online. They go to the place that sells a gun and they say, that one looks nice. It's only $175.
Right.
And they don't ask where it's made or if it's a good one. They just give the money for the gun.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, even if they ask these questions, right? The gun store does what gun stores do. It's great.
That sounds great.
It's made in a country that's it's a lot like Greece. It's a lot like Greece if all the interesting stuff wasn't there.
Yeah. They blew it up. But anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this industry. I couldn't even tell you. I think that there's going to be a lot of changes, though. My personal opinion is that to survive right now, companies need to do anything but make the same thing.
Right.
Right.
It's a question of, at some rate, manufacturing your own demand. Mm-hmm. And companies have been allowed to be incredibly lazy about that for a long time. But ultimately, right, I think the inflection point, the point where there can be no more argument about this, will come 5 years after the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court ever takes a hardware ban and decides it the way that they ought to, it seems like they're poised to anyway. Mm-hmm. Give it 5 years for California to get full, and the AR market's pretty much done. There is no $500 AR market anymore.
Right. Yep.
Or if there's one company doing it, right, it will be the usual suspect, and it's just them doing it.
Yep.
And they will get away with making them even lower quality than they are now, and people won't complain about it.
Yep, because that'll be the standard of comparison. Kind of like the Ruger 1022. People say that that's a good semi-automatic rifle because that's what they're told is the standard.
Yeah, because what are your other options? I mean, even whenever we're asked, it's like, well, what would you recommend instead? And we're like, we're
like, I have this weird expensive thing from the past.
Yeah, this was produced in the past, and it's much better, and it should have replaced it.
Yeah,
because Ruger's just been able to crap out ones that aren't very good.
Right. Yeah. It's like, well, everyone has tried to make the better one, and they succeeded many times.
They succeeded in making it, just not like making it.
They failed successfully repeatedly. But anyway, and then it's so frustrating, right? Because you think, like, when people think that this is standard, right? And then you give them, like, it should be easy to blow them out of the water, but then you realize they just don't actually care.
Right.
They don't care that the gun jams frequently. They just, because that's what it is.
They've just been Stockholm syndrome into going like, oh yes, the way that you hold this bolt open is normal and good.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get some good news though. The Minnesota Supreme Court says it's legal to carry a ghost gun,
ghost,
go without a serial number. Yes, Minnesota Supreme Court ruled Wednesday that it's legal for Minnesotans to carry a ghost gun without a serial number. Stems from a 2022 case when a state patrol trooper responded to a rollover crash. I remember this one. And the driver told the trooper there was a pistol in the car and that he didn't have a permit. While searching the car, trooper found the ghost gun, didn't have a serial number, charged him with felony possession and carrying without a permit, which was weird because, again, car, curtilage, right? Minnesota statute written in 1994 criminalized receiving or possessing firearms not identified by a serial number. I remember talking about this back then.
We talked about this on Twig, and the interesting thing about this law is it was in 94, right. The law sought to prohibit two things that were also already prohibited federally, right? It was one of these duplicative state laws to make it easier to charge. It prohibited guns with defaced serial numbers, and it prohibited guns that were not prohibited guns that were not marked in compliance with the federal ruling,
right?
The federal rules as far as marking in compliance on NFA firearms. Right. And a bunch of prosecutors in Minnesota, in coordination with an anti-gun law college in Minnesota, decided they were going to start charging people for having firearms that were not properly serialized and registered with the government as NFA firearms if they were just homemade guns. Not NFA stuff, just stuff that didn't have a serial number because
they were just making it up.
Right, the law really wasn't ambiguous about this, and the Supreme Court, the Minnesota Supreme Court here got it correct. The law wasn't ambiguous, but if you intentionally read it wrong, You could
Yeah.
totally arrest somebody for this because this is
Yeah. And it's like, it wasn't close, because I remember we talked about it and we read it and we were both like, what is going on? Like, it's the federal law, it says as required by federal law. And so, yeah, the Minnesota Supreme Court, which, why did it have to go that far? Determined the statute criminalizes possessing a firearm not identified by a serial number. Only a federal law requires that the firearm have a serial number.
Literally just what the statute says.
Yeah, they literally read it and they like turned it back around to the state.
I said, what did you think this means?
Yeah, it was wild. But so, thank God, they came to the right result. I hope that they didn't harass and torture this man for too long.
Well, it was this guy and several other guys. I'm going to forget his name. I think his last name is Walker. I want to say his first name is Josh, but I could be wrong about that. I had been conversing on Twitter with his mother for some time since he was arrested, because that was the whole case where they had been shooting in a backyard where they'd always shot, and a neighbor so far away it couldn't have possibly been in range, said that a bullet struck their glass window, and then the bullet was never recovered inside their house. And also the neighbor was mowing at the time this happened. So it's like, I wonder how the glass got broke. Like, Jesus. But anyway, they went and arrested the guys, or the cops went and questioned the guys who were shooting at the time. And, they said that, like, oh yeah, they've got the guns, and they showed them off. It's like, well, we made them ourselves. And then the cops arrested them because it's like, well, your gun doesn't have a number, and had gone about ruining this guy's life for the past couple of years, dragging him through court for this god-awful process, all for a law that wasn't even remotely applicable to what he had going on. And I guess I had sort of like communicated very briefly with his lawyer at one point, and he and I came to the same, I think we were of the same mind, where he was trying to make the argument that, because the way the prosecutors were arguing, right, is that because serial number isn't defined in the statute as the federal serial number, it just says that you have to have it marked in compliance with federal law, like classic disingenuous prosecutor stuff. They were saying that, well, the gun has to have a number then, because it has to have a serial number, but serial number isn't defined. It just says it has to have the serial number engraving has to be like the federal law.
Right.
So
So if we're importing NFA requirements or requirements for manufacturers, like, and ignoring that it says as federal law, right? And so they were like, but it still says then that it needs a serial number. And so his lawyer and I were of the same mind, where it's like, these guns had caliber markings on the barrel, didn't they? Yes, I remember I remember we talked about that, and that is actually won repeatedly. Because
he did succeed in dragging the case out, at least for this long, because of that, which is good, because certainly had it gone to trial and things went wrong, it would really suck for him to have to have gone to jail for something that not only is his right, but wasn't even illegal in the first place. God, it makes your skin crawl to think about.
Yeah, but good thing.
Justice was
good
done.
Result. Yeah, good. The justice is done slow and hot. It's just like FFL payments, guys. Got FFLpaymentprocessing.com. Get rates. Go check them out. Give them a call. You can save a lot of money, guys. It's plain and simple. If you're gonna take credit cards, give these people a shout. You're wasting money if you don't. Why would you leave money on the table, stupid? What's wrong with you? Idiot. Next up, John Crump. Love him. Love you, John. Nice headline. Not quite. Yeah. So the headline is Trump bans banks from discriminating against gun companies. No, it's adjusted the policy saying it is the policy of the United States that no Americans should be denied access to financial services because of their constitutionally or statutorily protected beliefs, affiliations, or political views, and to ensure that politicized or unlawful debanking is not used as a tool to inhibit such beliefs, affiliations, or political views. That is not a ban, but it is certainly a gesture towards that end. And basically what this is a new order, right, directing his various horses and men to not be evil and to tell the banks not to be evil to gun companies, because, previously
Obama specifically had leaned on banks. This isn't necessarily the same exact thing, but Obama had tried to lean on banks and credit card companies through executive action to make it so that you couldn't use, like, his main goal was to make it so that you couldn't use credit cards to buy a gun. Like, you couldn't use electronic payment at all, I'm sure was his ultimate goal, to buy a gun, right? Make it more difficult. But then B, make it more difficult for gun businesses and companies to get business loans, make it more difficult for them to secure any sort of financial backing, make it so that they can't keep their money at certain banks, right? Give banks the capability to not deal with gun companies at all,
Right.
which, to some extent, the banks as businesses are able to discriminate to some extent about companies. However, they have additional federal regulations and guidelines they have to follow because of the whole necessity of banks. They're almost treated as being a public utility to some extent, where it's like, they can't do the gay wedding cake thing.
Yeah.
You can't have the bank that says, sorry, no gay wedding cakes here. But there has been a consistent and concerted effort by anti-gun Democrats to try and make it so that they can so discriminate against gun companies, and they certainly shouldn't be able to.
Right.
Trump's executive order here didn't say it didn't say in black and white, you can't do this to gun companies.
But it was like, you should stop. And it's because the funny thing is that this wasn't really written policy before. It was like DOJ and FDIC would kind of like nudge banks and be like, hey, that's very high risk. Don't you think that's in the, like, basically mostly unwritten, would just coach them and also pressure them, right, to exclude these types of businesses from their portfolios, and in their guidance documents considered gun companies to be high risk, which weren't binding on the banks, by the way. And this is actually how Gino started FFL payment processing, is that I helped him go to the banks, our partner banks, and give a presentation on the fact that gun companies are not high risk, and it's actually
the lowest risk business that can possibly exist.
Yes, and we had there's this whole presentation, so we get great rates to then be able to pass on to other people. This is all, it's symbolism, right? This is the Trump administration seeking legitimacy through these sorts of public displays, or at least trying to capture a perception of legitimacy. It doesn't do anything, though.
Or at the very least, that if there was still some vestiges at these federal agencies that thought they needed to continue doing this, because the longer I live and the more I learn, the more I see that the federal government is not some totem pole where the president's at the top and everybody's below him looking to above. It's a lot of one hand not knowing. It's not just one hand not knowing what the other is doing. One hand's not aware of the fact that it has fingers, and also there is another hand on the other side of the building, right? They don't know this. And so perhaps this is just there to be like, hey guys, be totally clear. Obama's gone. We're not doing this anymore.
Right.
So, if we're to play devil's advocate to what's probably most likely, then maybe they're just trying to be like, hey guys, just so we're sure this is how it's going to be now.
Right.
But it seems that the most likely explanation is that this is just symbolic, so that way he can, he or Pam Bondi or somebody can go on Fox News to be like,
we got him. Yeah, we got him. But it's certainly not a bad thing, but it's also not a ban on this or that or the other thing. The main problem is that the banks still run by the same people, and they're not our friends, right? They're not. It just is what it is. They are generally friends with people who don't like guns, right? It just is what it is, and it's provable. You can look, right?
There's a pretty heavy intersection, and I don't know why so much of a capitalist society ends up being this way, but there's a pretty heavy emphasis on public perception of products, especially with regards to investments in people's money. People who are very rich, a lot of people who are very rich, do not want their money that's invested in a bank or any sort of scheme to be associated with the school of Las Vegas, right? For example, they don't want their money to have profited from something that was sold that facilitated this thing. They would like their hands to be clean instead.
School Las Vegas.
so where the rubber meets the road, right? Where these banks are willing to give out loans or be associated with a particular industry, they're okay with things like doctors giving meth to kids, right? This is okay. This is okay because everybody says it's okay.
The thing that literally is a massive cause of death, medical malpractice.
It's a massive cause of school Las Vegas.
Yes. Oh, there's a 1 in 11.9 million chance that you might do a school Las Vegas. It's too high. Oh, there's a 1 in 40 chance you'll murder someone, Doc. Right.
Oh, great.
Yeah, how much do you need?
It's all about public perception in messaging, especially through the media. But
that's the big thing. That's the big thing. So there were two things that we had talked about, right? So one was the high risk category. It's kind of like it's getting harder for the banks to hide behind that because it's so demonstrably low risk. It's so proven, like every metric it shows that this is actually one of the best places you want your money as a bank. So now they can still rely on reputational risk. And this does not take that away from the bank, right? Because the bank's still going to be able to, at the end of the day, their underwriting department, when they deny you your loan, they're going to say, oh, well, so there was a few things. So for 1 year financials, we blah, 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 right? And they just make up a bunch of words that, because you could be totally solvent, totally good, totally liquid, have a like perfect business plan, and they'll go, duh, duh, duh. And also there's a reputational risk and then that's the real answer, right?
Right, because the bank doesn't want a gun sold at your store to be in a news story saying that it was used to learn how to Las Vegas. And the
bank doesn't want. Well, here's another one. The bank doesn't want some journal lizard to somehow figure out that, a new gun store in town here with the help of JP Morgan Chase, right? Enabling.
Brady and Giffords would cream their pants to be able to say, like, here's the top 5 biggest banks. Here's every gun company that's ever had financial dealings with them.
Right.
They would love to have this data. Because it's a name and shame campaign, right? Because ultimately, what are these banks' reaction going to be is, there's going to be a lot of public outcry saying how bad it is that people are exercising these rights and the banks are facilitating free trade and commerce. This is actually awful. And instead, we should have a shame-based economy where the only things that can get money and have a place to store their money even is the businesses that don't get shamed very much. Right? The businesses that most people can agree in our silly little world, right? In our liberal democracy, where everything is okay, right? It's okay to spend money on this. Like sex changes for children is fine. It's okay if you want to fund that, but guns? Come on.
What, man? That's ridiculous. No, it was just do some kind of soap.
Just do soap or something.
Yeah,
instead.
It's just like soap. Soap's a big business, Like, God, my wife took me to that. I don't even know what it was called, but it was this big thing, like huge open ceilings, and you can design your own soap. And I was just like, she's not into that, but her sister was. I was like, no, we're doing it. I want to experience this. Sat on the big marble table as they brought out all of the different oils. Like, spent. I want to make one that smells
like guns.
Spent $80.
Just put WD-40 in it.
I brought my oral.
It's just linseed and WD-40.
I can pick 3 flavors, right? Linseed, WD-40, tight group. Make it smell like this.
That's great.
And diesel. But yeah. Anyway, all that. Whatever. Who cares? Everything is fake anyway. Next up, some more good news, guys. North Carolina, which has been really struggling to be, not beating the allegations of discount Virginia, but at least now the Senate has overridden the governor's permitless carry veto, and so this is now scheduled for a House vote on August 26th. So that's exciting.
And I think there needs to be 2 votes that flip compared to where it was before, but those votes do exist in Republicans. Right. So if they would pull their heads out of their asses and stop listening to the cops doing but we wouldn't know who's carrying a gun, as though they don't know who carries a gun, because
they don't even know if they're carrying a gun. That's why they keep hitting themselves so much.
It's like if we can stop listening to those guys and instead just be intelligent, then we'd have probably the last state that can be constitutional carry without skullduggery and violence having to happen. And by violence, I mean political violence from the federal government, because ultimately, at some rate, Trump said that he would make sure it happens, and I'm willing to believe that something might happen, that we may eventually get. It might be a weak version. There's been several bills with very weak language proposed, but if we could get something like Massey's proposed language, that would be fantastic. As far as constitutional carry that essentially makes it so that permit schemes and fees and fines just go away forever.
But that would just be an actual amendment to the Constitution. It's just we amend to the Second Amendment. Obviously, this includes carrying an operable firearm on your body, you stupid idiot. Stop it.
Just knock it off.
Yeah, and we mean it, please. Oh. Don't go away. We have more story. But before that, PatriotPatchCompany.com, guys. Longest time supporter of the show. Go to PatriotPatch.co. Longest term supporter of the show. Oh, I roll my own. You can roll your own patches and also your own whatever. Summer vibes are here. So check it out. There's the iguana. Like we talked about that last time. I feel personally attacked by this patch. But yeah, guys, go to patriotpatch.co and don't forget to use promotional code TWIG10. Get you a nice little discount on your order. Speaking of the Republicans, we got the Senate. They want to fully fund the ATF. Yeah, Senate committee keeps ATF budget intact because we have to protect our brave America law enforcer. Back the thin blue. That means ATF too, right, guys?
Yeah.
So yeah, the measure was advanced last week by a vote of 19 to 10. So the House version of this funding bill sliced the ATF proposed budget from 1.625 to 1.2 billion, right? So this is we're giving them nothing. It's a shoestring, right? The Senate version said, I just take the whole thing, 1.625. This legislation includes funding to ensure that brave men and women who make up law enforcement departments across the country have the resources and personnel needed to combat the fentanyl crisis, apprehending violent fugitives, and prosecuting criminals, said Susan Collins of Maine, a state which was a mistake.
And of course, the like beneath the headline, this is a great big funding bill. This isn't. They weren't just looking at the ATF here, right? There's a lot of things worked into this. The Senate just, it seems, does not prioritize defunding the ATF the way it seems that the House did.
Right.
The House
Senate was like,
the House was, I think we talked about last time, the House in a rather commendable way was specifically targeting ATF initiatives that they disagreed with in defunding those, which isn't a bad way to have the government self-correct its own executive runaway problem.
Right.
It's just be like, okay, no money. Okay, that's dumb. We don't like that. No money. Because that certainly does tie their hands to some extent because Congress has the money.
Right.
But it seems like that's maybe not a priority to the Senate. Now, this isn't like the final language of this bill. This is not the House bill being altered by the Senate. These are sort of two competing bills, and then they're going to switch them back and forth like they're exchanging love notes with each other, and then see like, between the two of them, figure out some version that they can both agree on. I hope it cuts the ATF budget even further because that would be funny, but we'll just have to see what happens.
Yep, we will. But all right, guys, speaking of seeing what happens, that's it for this episode. Be sure to stick around for next time. Of course, we will see you maybe in 1 week, maybe 2. I don't know. It's This Week in Guns. That's how we do.
It depends on how nice you are in leaving a comment. You have to leave in the comment if it should be 1 week or 2 weeks. And we absolutely promise that factors in somehow.
I promise. Yes, do that. Join the Patreons. That's really super important because if not, I will wither up like a little tiny plant and cease photosynthesizing. And Ivan will then, if I'm not photosynthesized, Ivan won't get any kibble.
I won't get any nectar.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. We will see you next time.